We cross to my colleague now, Bongiwe, who's standing by with a political analyst, Levy Ndou.
Very much, Mfundo. Of course, as you say, we'll continue to give our viewers rolling coverage of this important milestone in our democracy. And speaking about milestones, we are, of course, hearing a lot of talk from some of the analysts as well as those who are, just watching from the sidelines what is currently taking place around the political dynamics in South Africa. Some polls predicting that it could be a coalition arrangement at national level. Others are saying that potentially even at provincial level. But what does a coalition look like at national level? You think about even at local government level as well, in some of the instability that we've seen in some councils. Now the Local Government Municipal Structures Amendment Bill coming into play now. It's out for public comment. Of course, a lot, to say about this particular one, given some of the instability that we've seen. But Dr. Levy Ndou is joining us now to talk about the possibility of a coalition government. If it is there, if it does exist, and if it does, what does it mean then for South Africa? Dr. Ndou, thank you so much for your time.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the viewers at home.
Good afternoon. Let's start by, looking at some of the coalition arrangements that we've seen in some of the councils. And you would, of course, hear residents saying that for them, it leaves them confused because they voted for one person, but now they're seeing a different mayor, taking the reins. But at the same time, that mayor only possibly lasts a month in some of these positions. And then others say that it impacts service delivery. How would you say, looking at the coalition picture that we've had at local government level, we're fared as South Africa?
Well, I think it's important to start by looking at the coalition arrangements in South Africa in general, especially at local government level. Remember, we have got over 60 local councils, and what we have observed is that coalitions appears to be working in some councils. But when you look at the metros, that's where there are big challenges. And I'll tell you why. You have this instability and poor governance in the metros because of the budget or the purse that they have. So politicians would love to have access to these resources, and that's why there is these tensions that talks to access to power.
I suppose the resources speak to power then.
Indeed, they do. The interest or the zeal to be in a position of influence to control resources, because you have this idea that the purse is big here, so you actually want to be in charge of this purse. Whether it's for personal purposes or in the best interest of citizens, that's a discussion for another day. But where there is more resources, financial resources, that's where we're seeing these tensions. But if one is to come back to your question, how coalitions will look like, they would possibly look like what we see in the metros. I know that is not where we want to go, because every patriotic citizen would love to see stability, would love to see good governance, would love to see services being delivered. And the manner in which these coalitions have been arranged in South Africa, I would fully agree with you. They've created a lot of confusion amongst those that are in power and for the citizens themselves.
So can we afford to have that confusion at national level, for example?
We cannot afford to have that confusion. What we can afford to do is to learn from what has happened with these coalitions and find ways and means to do our things better and make sure that whatever, if we're forced to go into a coalition, we should therefore be able to come with a government that is workable, with a government that ordinary citizens will be able to resonate with, and they should actually be able to see change coming to these people. But my biggest challenge is that you need maturity on the part of politicians. When we say there is instability, there is infighting, it is not ordinary citizens who are doing that. It is our public representatives that were voted into power who are not able to work together. And if they are put into office through coalitions, therefore citizens are saying, apart from the differences that you have, find ways to be able to work together.
You talk about maturity. What does it look like? And the reason I ask this question is because you think about some of the political parties, for example, who will be in some of these metros. When you speak to them, they'll tell you that they're actually exercising a lot of maturity and they're displaying it because they're fighting for the needs and the demands of their constituency. So that is why they then would rather be at loggerheads in some of these instances as opposed to getting along because they really want to ensure that their constituencies are represented.
We need politicians who are able to differ, but at the end of the day, agree. We need politicians who would not invest a lot of time on differences, but who must invest a lot of time on forging an agreement. You need political parties and political leaders who must be able to have time frames on the programs and priorities of the areas in which they are given responsibilities so that there should be progress. How many council meetings could not proceed because other coalition partners are not happy that the budget is going to be passed? How many council meetings have been boycotted by coalition partners, which creates a situation where there is no quorum, and that affects the ordinary citizens. When you're fighting for citizens or your constituency, you must do that in a manner that at the end of the day, they end up benefiting. And unfortunately, citizens say we are getting frustrated because they don't see progress.
So in your view then, what makes some of these arrangements work in some of the councils and not in the metros? When you look at the councils, what's going on there? What are they doing right?
Firstly, they would secretly sit down and agree on the governance of the metro, secretly. They would make sure that whatever has been agreed upon is not known to ordinary citizens. And that creates a situation where ordinary citizens and members of different political parties cannot make these people account because they don't know what they've agreed upon. And therefore, it creates a situation where, firstly, even members of some political parties, ordinary citizens, don't know what this coalition is all about. What is the role of their leaders and their political parties in those coalitions? That in itself, it's a creation of a confusion.
I suppose it speaks then to the call by some of the residents who are saying publicize some of these agreements that you are having in secret so that they're not only seen as gentlemen's agreements, but actually they are binding on both parties or even more.
We believe in accountability, in openness and transparency. And I think they are quite fair when they say, make sure that you make your agreements public. Actually, there are those who are saying that what will be best is to legalize these agreements so that when you agree on the do's and the don'ts of your agreement, you agree on what is supposed to be done and what is not supposed to be done, the obligations of those that are entering into a coalition, so that when they do something contrary to the agreement, citizens will be there to know that this is a partner in a coalition who is making sure that the coalition does not work and that compromises service delivery. So
how then do they begin to also work around another issue that we've seen being talked about over time? And I remember at some point Helen Ziller from the Democratic Alliance saying that it's time to have an honest conversation and deal with the issue of kingmakers, because in some of these arrangements you're seeing that the one party that would have very, very minimal support is actually calling the shots because everyone is looking to get their support in order to sway things in their favor.
I think that is the discussion that already is now in the public space, is rolling out. My sense is that in a coalition and in a democracy, the views of the people should matter. And of course, if ordinary citizens have voted Party A in its majority, they are actually saying they've got confidence in that party. Those that are in a council, knowing that they are in a minority in terms of votes, it does not require anybody else to remind them that your support is quite minimal. You therefore cannot occupy such positions. But the challenge we have is that based on the current arrangement, that is how things are. And it is good that there is a bill that is out that such has to change. But also at the same time, politicians should not at all cost want to be in charge whilst they've not been given the mandate to be in charge by the voters.
Well, it also speaks to a number of them who say that if you give me the opportunity, I'll use it. Because if you're putting me in charge, because I possibly have 3 votes that could, 3 seats that could actually sway things into your favor, I then will not refuse that particular opportunity. So how do they begin to have these frank conversations? Because you're calling on them to not want to be in charge at all costs, but you're also calling on them to be responsible in some of these arrangements. But that's not what we've seen on the ground.
It talks to the legal arrangements of these coalitions. It talks to proportional representation. And if we are able to agree on such, to say, if you got this number of seats, this is the kind of responsibility that you should have. That is where we say voters have actually forced you to work together. You don't need to have someone having more powers in the council, but who is not given these powers by the electorate. Because that, in my view, is getting into a position of authority through the back door. Because that is the mandate that you are not given by the voters. But also at the same time, all these political parties want to be in charge. And that's why they're contesting for these elections. So unfortunately, when the the opportunity presents itself, there is no way that a politician will resist that. It
sounds like, listening to what you're saying, the national dialogue on coalitions did very little to try and, help us understand this minefield.
Indeed, and you wouldn't be surprised. Our politicians in South Africa just can't work together. When you're opening up a dialogue far from the elections, and you say, let's have a discussion about this, because things are getting out of hand, you don't get cooperation. That is the nature of our politicians. But I think we should not necessarily blame them. We should assist them to learn and understand that if things are not working, there are other options. And I think it's time that we look for other options in this country if indeed we need progress.
I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you see coalitions, should we get there? How do you see them working out at national? Because a number of people are asking, can we see an MK party working with other parties despite them saying that they're looking for a 2/3 majority? Or can we see a DA, ANC coalition in your view? What do you think? What does the picture tell you?
Maybe we should start by asking ourselves a question. Do we still have the Moon Pact?
Actually, you think about the Moonshot Pact, which now culminated into a multi-party charter.
Yes.
I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because I also want us to talk about the dynamic there as we end off. But when it comes into the MK party, the DA, the EFF, ANC, how do you see things pan out there?
Politicians are like chameleons. They would differ today, say all sorts of things, but after the elections, when they see the results, when the reality is there, all these things that we hear politicians talking about, I'm telling you they're going to change. The people that you might think that they are enemies might be able to come together and form a coalition. So anything is possible. You'll recall the 2016 local government elections and the 2021 local government elections. There are political parties that said, we'll never give our vote to party A and B. We'll never work with this party. But look now, the very same people who said they won't work with certain political parties are actually working with them.
And then let's go to the multi-party charter, which we were here actually when they were telling us about the Moonshot Pact, and that is the Democratic Alliance. And then it culminated into the multi-party charter. We're now seeing different political parties within that particular arrangement. And then also they seem to also have double speak, but then they talk about how they're representing their constituencies, but at the same time they want to work together. What becomes of this multi-party charter after the elections?
Well, firstly, when the idea of the multi-party charter came, for me it appeared to be a message that says these parties appears to be convinced that individually they cannot win the elections, and that's why they've decided to come together so that they can fight the elections together. But what appears to be the agreement is that let's go and contest elections out there independently, and based on the numbers that we've accumulated, we're going to sit down and check how we stand. And that, in my view, you're standing on a very shaky ground, because it therefore means that based on that, any other party can decide to get out of the charter. But another biggest question we should ask ourselves is the agreement of the multi-party charter binding? And to which extent is that a legal agreement? And what is the time frame? And many other entities, unfortunately, they are not there. So already we have had other parties saying we are prepared even to work with the ANC, because when power is getting towards politicians, they hardly have the ability to resist.
Okay, I think we'll continue to talk about this in the coming days, because there's a lot of talk around some of the arrangements in Mfundo. A lot of, analysts, of course, differing in opinion when it comes to whether or not are we likely to see a coalition arrangement, or is the ANC going to retain a majority, or are we going to see a dip? There's a lot of talk, a lot of polling, different, results that we see from different polls on Mfundo.
Indeed, quite a lot of polling that we've seen throughout perhaps the last 3 to 4 months. So it will be quite interesting to see the final picture as to what South Africa's government will look like.